There's no time. Maul's influence on Mandalore is destroying my people. My sister. I thought she meant something to you.
I absolutely hated this scene with Bo-Katan and Obi-Wan. You're really telling me that you spend literally the last few years fighting against your own sister, and when you don't get what you want, you try playing the dead sister card. A literal child, if you ask me. Yet she's painted as a figure of strength, someone who never gave up on her people. But when you look closer, when you truly examine her choices, you start to see a different story. A story not of heroism, but of failure. A story of betrayal. A story of a sister who turned her back on the one person who tried to save Mandalore the right way. Because before Bo-Katan was the so-called rightful ruler of Mandalore, before she claimed to be fighting for her people, she was something else. She was a traitor. A warrior who placed her pride above her own family. A woman who saw her own sister not as an ally, but as an obstacle. And because of that, she didn't just lose Satine. She helped destroy everything her sister had built. And the worst part is, she never really acknowledged it. She never took responsibility for the role she played in Mandalore's downfall. She shifted the blame, rewriting the story so she could still see herself as the hero, but that's not what she was. Because the truth is, if Bo-Katan had made different choices, if she had stood by her sister instead of turning against her, Mandalore might still be standing, Satine might still be alive, and everything that followed might never have happened. But she didn't. She sided with terrorists. She played a dangerous game of war and power, believing she was doing the right thing, only to lose everything in the end. And that's what makes her such a frustrating character. She acts like she was always meant to lead, like she was always fighting for her people, but her actions tell a different story. A story of mistakes, misjudgment, and the consequences of refusing to learn from the past. In this video, I will explain to you why Bo-Katan is such a terrible sister. A warrior who thought she was saving her home world, when in reality, she was one of the biggest reasons it fell. And by the time she realized that truth, it was already too late. Bo-Katan always saw herself as a true Mandalorian, a warrior, a leader, someone destined to bring her people back to glory. But the irony is, the person who truly carried Mandalore forward was her sister, Satine, a woman who ruled with wisdom, who believed in peace, and who actually tried to save their people from the endless cycle of war. But Bo-Katan never saw it that way. She saw Satine as weak, as naive, as someone who abandoned their traditions for ideals that had no place in Mandalorian culture. And because of that, she turned her back on her own sister. She didn't just disagree with her, she fought against her. She became her enemy. That's the part that stings the most. Bo-Katan had a choice. She could have helped Satine. She could have stood by her and given her guidance from a warrior's perspective. But instead, she walked away. And not just walked away, but actively worked against her own blood. All because she didn't like how Satine ruled. And that decision, that single choice, it shaped the future of Mandalore in the worst way possible. Because from the moment she turned her back on her sister, Mandalore's fate was sealed. And Bo-Katan never even realized it until it was too late. It wasn't enough for Bo-Katan to simply reject her sister's rule. No, she went even further. She joined a Death Watch, a group that wanted to overthrow Satine and bring back the warrior ways of old. A group that had no problem using violence and terror to achieve their goals. And she stood with them. She fought with them. She believed in them. And for what? Because she thought her way of ruling was wrong. Because she thought Mandalore needed to be strong. What Bo-Katan failed to understand was that Satine was strong. Not in the way of warriors, but in the way of leaders. She kept Mandalore standing without raising a blaster. She maintained order without resorting to fear. That takes more strength than Bo-Katan ever realized. But instead of respecting that, Bo-Katan helped tear it all down. She sided with extremists. She worked with criminals. And when they finally succeeded in overthrowing Satine, Bo-Katan didn't even stop to consider what she had done. She only cared that she had won. That the throne was no longer in the hands of her sister. But the victory didn't last long, because the moment Death Watch took control, they lost it. And who did they lose it to? Maul? A Sith? A foreigner? A monster who saw Mandalore as nothing more than a tool. And Bo-Katan, for all her pride, was completely powerless to stop him. This is where things should have changed for Bo-Katan. This is where she should have realized what she had done. That her choices had led to something far worse than what she had been fighting against. But instead of taking responsibility, she did what she always did. She shifted her allegiance. She turned against the very people she once called allies. She suddenly decided that Maul wasn't fit to rule Mandalore, that he was a tyrant, that his rule was illegitimate. But here's the thing. She had no problem with using Death Watch to overthrow Satine. She had no issue with using force to take power. But the moment she realized she wasn't in control, that's when she took issue with it. And that's the hypocrisy of it all. Bo-Katan liked to think of herself as a warrior with a code, someone who fought for the good of Mandalore, but her actions weren't about honor, they were about power. She wanted Mandalore to be ruled by her ideals, and the moment someone else took that power from her, she turned against them. But by then, the damage had already been done. Mandalore was broken, Death Watch was fractured, and worst of all, Satine was imprisoned, left to suffer in the very system Bo-Katan had helped create. And whether she wanted to admit it or not, that was on her. If there was ever a moment that should have changed Bo-Katan, it was this one. The moment her sister was executed. The moment Maul proved just how much power he truly had. The moment she had to watch as the one person who had always believed in a better future for Mandalore was struck down in front of her. And yet, even in that moment, Bo-Katan didn't cry out. She didn't break down. She barely reacted at all. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe, deep down, she knew this was the result of her own choices. That if she had just stood by Satine instead of working against her, none of this would have happened. And that's the part that hurts the most. Because Satine never saw Bo-Katan as an enemy. She never wanted to fight her own sister. She only wanted to protect her. And in the end, Bo-Katan couldn't do the same. She couldn't save Satine. She could only watch as she took her last breath. And after that, Bo-Katan moved on. She didn't dwell on it. She didn't reflect on it. She just continued fighting, because that's all she knew how to do. Fight war was all she had left. And maybe, in some way, that was the real tragedy of it all. Bo-Katan fought to take Mandalore back, but every time she gained power, she lost it again. First to Maul, then to the Empire. Every time she thought she was securing her people's future, she was only pushing them closer to ruin, and she never stopped to ask herself why. Because the truth is, Bo-Katan was never meant to lead. She wanted the throne, but she never understood what it meant to rule. Satine had tried to build a future without war. Bo-Katan, she only knew how to fight. And the problem with warriors is, they don't build. They only destroy. And that's exactly what happened. When the Empire came, Mandalore fell. Bo-Katan thought she could lead a rebellion. She thought she could take back control. But all she did was give the Empire an excuse to wipe Mandalore off the map. Her resistance wasn't a revolution. It was an execution sentence for her people. And once again, Bo-Katan was left with nothing. No throne, no people, no home. Just the ashes of everything she had fought for. And instead of realizing her mistakes, she kept pretending she was still the rightful ruler, that Mandalore needed her. But if that were true, why did she keep losing everything she tried to protect? Bo-Katan's entire life has been a series of failures. She fought against her sister, and she lost. She tried to take Mandalore back, and she lost. She waged war against the Empire, and she lost. And every time she lost, it was because of her own choices, her own arrogance, her own inability to see the bigger picture. She never learned. She never grew. She just kept repeating the same mistakes, over and over again, expecting a different outcome. And that's what makes her such a tragic figure. Not because she was a bad person, not because she was evil, but because she never understood why she kept failing. And that's why Mandalore suffered. Because people like Bo-Katan refused to let go of the past. Because they kept fighting wars that never needed to be fought. Because they cared more about power than about peace. And because of that, Mandalore was doomed to fall, again and again. And in the end, that's Bo-Katan's legacy. Not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a warrior who never knew when to stop fighting. And because of that, she lost everything. Mandalore has always been trapped in an endless cycle. War, defeat, rebuilding, another war, another fall. Over and over again. And Bo-Katan was one of the biggest reasons that cycle never ended. She thought she was fighting for her people, but all she ever did was drag them back into the same mistakes that had already destroyed them. She fought against her sister's vision because she believed Mandalorians were meant to be warriors. But where did that belief lead? To Death Watch? To Maul? To the Empire? To the Purge? Every time Mandalore had a chance to change, to become something more, Bo-Katan refused to let it happen. She clung to the past, to the idea that Mandalorians had to be fighters first and everything else second. But what did that really accomplish? Did Mandalore become stronger? No, it was wiped off the map. Did her people become more united? No, they were scattered across the galaxy, with no home to return to. Did she ever truly win? No. She spent her whole life fighting, and in the end, she had nothing to show for it except the ashes of a world that no longer existed. And that's the saddest part. Bo-Katan thought she was breaking the cycle. She thought she was saving Mandalore, but all she did was ensure that history repeated itself again and again. And by the time she realized it, it was already too late. Bo-Katan will never be remembered as the hero of Mandalore. She will never be remembered as the leader who saved her people. She will be remembered as a warrior who never knew when to stop fighting, a soldier without a cause, a leader without a kingdom. a sister who lost everything. Satine tried to build something better. She saw a future beyond war, but Bo-Katan never understood that. She was so obsessed with strength, with power, with reclaiming old Mandalore, that she never realized Mandalore didn't need to be reclaimed. It needed to evolve. It needed to change. And because she refused to see that, she doomed it. And that's what makes her such a tragic figure. Because there was another path for her, a different life. One where she stood by her sister instead of fighting against her. One where she helped shape Mandalore into something greater instead of trying to rebuild what had already failed. But she didn't choose that path. She never even saw it. So was Bo-Katan a terrible sister? Absolutely. But she was also a terrible leader, a terrible protector, a warrior without a cause, and a queen without a throne. And in the end, that's how history will remember her. Not as the savior of her home world, but as the reason it was lost forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to subscribe to Critical Analysis Hub for deep dives into the Star Wars movies, and check out Critical Analysis Hub Plus for case studies on Star Wars shows. Also, if you want to rep the fandom in style, check out the bio for awesome Star Wars Legos and Funko Pops. May the Force be with you. I'll see you in the next one.